Now, without further delay, let's begin today's event. I would like to introduce your presenter for today, and that is Steve Powers. Steve Powers is an executive with more than 30 years of business and technology management experience spanning several industries. He has developed multiple lines of business and successfully managed profitability, sales, service delivery, custom application development, technology deployment, IT operations, and IT support for clients and internal operations. He is currently the president and CEO of Redstone Consulting Group, a subsidiary of Redstone Federal Credit Union. Steve, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you everyone out on the webinar for joining us today. I hope to make this an informative session. Covering today's agenda, first, we'd like to provide you all with some background information on the ACIT exam itself, where it's coming from, what the implications are for credit union. Then share experience we learned the hard way through going through the exam as Redstone Federal Credit Union and the resulting best practices that came out of that experience. Finally, I'd like to talk to you about and show you a little bit of technology we've developed to support the process of preparing for the exam going forward. So we'll have a nice demo towards the middle of this presentation. So the NCUA has now come out with what they call their ACIT exam. It is an exam for the NCUA staff. It structures how they look at cyber within credit unions starting in 2018 and going forward from there. The exam was derived from the FFIEC CAT, if you're familiar with that, which tracks the NIST guidelines for security. It contains over 500 issues that credit unions need to address and over 60 categories of documents that they're looking for as part of the preparation for the exam. It is an Excel workbook, which has the benefits of being portable and available for anybody, but has some drawbacks when you're using it as a tool to organize a team effort. And finally, this is part of the IT exam going forward. Just a quick summary, what does the ACIT look like versus the CAT? The CAT, which was launched in 2015 by FFIEC, focuses on self-assessment. It was really put together so credit unions had a structured way, and community banks had a structured way to look at their cyber posture, identify where their gaps were, and begin the process of improving. It does capture an entity's risk profile and the domain maturity. The ACIT tool, in contrast, was developed by the NCUA with a focus on assessment. They're looking for demonstration of your practices. So they're interested in how you answer the question, but as much on how you substantiate with documentation that answer. Instead of capturing, they're focused on assessing the risk profile, the domain maturity, and a big element of it is the document request list where they're looking for the documentary evidence of practices. Who does ACIT apply to? In 2017, it was a proof of concept that they ran. It impacted a number of credit unions over $1 billion in assets who were part of the proof of concept. We've talked directly with about 10 of those institutions to gather their experience. In 2018, it's applying to all credit unions of $1 billion up in assets. Our parent credit union, Redstone, was subject to it in April of this year. In 2019, the bar is going down to at least $300 million, and in most recent conversations with NCUA, there was an indication that it may go as low as $100 million in assets to where this examination will apply. So what was our experience with this exam? When Redstone went through it, what we saw was it was separate, standalone audit. It was with a cybersecurity focus. It covered sections 748, sections A and B, GLBA, and the ACIT questionnaire at this point. Going forward, we think that they will move more to just the ACIT questionnaire. They did send us the documentation list in advance. It was pretty much the documentation request list contained within the ACIT, so we had to assemble and provide documents in those 60-plus categories. When they came in, they reviewed us on our risk profile, our domain maturity at the baseline level, and the documentation we had to back it up. as an emphasis, they did restrict the review to the baseline level, even though we provided domain maturity information at evolving intermediate levels. The focus of the first exam was establishing a solid baseline. Different from what we'd experienced in the past, with the ACID kind of guiding the exam, they stayed focused on the items in the ACID exam throughout the examination process, which was different from where we would experience things sometimes going off on tangents prior. Also, they were focused on following up on the answers we provided to the questions, substantiating that through staff interviews, and importantly, we moved beyond just, hey, check the box examination to getting to the point where we were discussing best practices and actually collaborating on how we might improve our security posture. From a timing perspective, we had 2 SMEs on site for a week for the ACID, and we went through 1 week of follow-up once they went off-site, where they were asking follow-up questions and requesting follow-up documentation. Going through that, we did learn a few lessons we'd like to share. The first and the biggest one is prepare in advance if you want the exam to be more productive. Once you're prepared, if you've shared the answers to the questions with the NCUA, if you've shared the documentation in advance, the interactions on site focus more on best practices. They are substantiating the answers as they have in the past through some spot checking of particular ones, but we were able to glean a better understanding of their perspective and industry best practices because we had been prepared. We also found that our experience was that having been prepared shortened the follow-up interactions significantly. Usually we had seen 2 weeks to a month of follow-up. In this case, we saw 1 week. And as I said, it leads to a better perspective of the cyber posture. They're validating our answers, educating us, rather than just trying to get the answers assembled. The second lesson learned, it's all about the documentation at this point. Answering the questions is easy. Substantiating your answer with documentary evidence is more difficult. We did put significant emphasis on assembling and updating the documents ahead of the exam. We've been fortunate in that our internal audits had reviewed us 3 months prior, basically on the information here, and it flagged the discrepancy on the documentation. So we had several months to get that together and make sure that it was up to date, and those months were both needed and valuable. Then finally, covering the DRL, making sure that you've got the items addressed. Most of the items in the DRL are focused on baseline maturity, and since that's what they were examining for, it was important to cover the great majority of the DRL that they provided. Last lesson we saw, the examiners, as they went around, asked the same questions of multiple people, trying to make sure we gave the same answers. In most cases we did. It was fortunate that we had prepared as a team to do this rather than one individual preparing the answers. So everyone had the context, knew really the answers and the logic behind why we'd answered it that way. So those are really the lessons that we wanted to share from a Redstone Federal Credit Union perspective. So what I wanted to do then is just there's a few other lessons that we had learned in talking to the group that was the pilot group in 2017, what issues they faced in preparing for it. So in summary, they had the same issues assembling the documentation. They hadn't been asked for many of these documents before. Some of them didn't exist. Some of them were stored in different places. There might have been inconsistent versions. Getting that pulled together and tightened up for the examiners was a challenge. The people we talked with did work with using the ACID workbook or the CAT workbook in many instances. They floated those out. There were multiple versions they had to merge the answers together on as they went back to get ready for the exam. Some of them we talked to had a practice of holding meetings with lots of folks so they could make progress just to ensure that they were being collaborative And it's usual case in any meeting with 4 or more people, a couple of folks were checked out on their cell phones. Keeping up with where they were progressing status-wise was a challenge with the work distributed and no way of knowing how the individuals were doing and getting prepared. And there was, with several hundred statements to address, there was some challenges around knowing who was responsible for each item. And then lastly, because this was really the first time for some of them, they had not done the CAT in preparation. They weren't really familiar with the perspective of the statements that they were addressing. They lacked some contextual information that led to answering them in the way they thought was accurate, but wasn't really the way the NCUA intended. In talking to them, the main perspective we got from the folks tasked with getting the project done was that they were herding cats daily, is what we call it. So as a result of our experience in going through the exam and the lessons we learned from the folks that went through the pilot, Redstone has created an online portal to simplify the preparation. We moved from using Excel to using modern web-based tools to run the examination. We've built in a framework that simplifies teamwork, allows everyone to see the same view of information, that tracks and updates progress in real time, so you always know where you stand against your target date. Assembles a library of documents, so everyone is looking at the same evidence as they're either addressing or resolving statements. Also, through a workflow and assignments process, we make sure that ownership is clear. There's no confusion over what you're responsible for. The infrastructure for sharing comments, for sharing the status, improves the collaboration using an online platform instead of having to assemble folks into a meeting room to get the same context. And finally, the tool puts the appropriate contextual information at the team's fingertips so they know as they're addressing the statements how the NCUA is going to look at those when they go through the examination process. A couple of aspects of the tool I'd like to cover before we go into the demo. We have built a workflow into the tool. Each issue goes through this workflow. The workflow ensures that each issue is fully vetted, fully reviewed. The answer represents the credit union's position before it's released to the examiners. And as part of that, we track the status. We always know what step in the workflow an issue is in. We always know who's responsible for it. Importantly, the workflow can be tailored for the scale of the credit union. So a couple of the review steps, the in-review and the outside review step, are both optional. They can be tailored out to go from a 6-step workflow to a 4-step workflow, with really 3 steps being internal, edit, approval, and release. Also integral to the tool functioning is roles. We've defined 7 different roles that are implemented into the system, from editor down through the NCUA examiner. Each role has different privileges, has different responsibilities in the workflow. A couple of unique roles, the oversight role really doesn't participate in the workflow, but it's set up for folks that need to have a perspective on how things are progressing. So it's essentially read-only access to all the information in the system. On the outside review role was set up so that a credit union could engage an outside resource to assist in the process, and that resource would be able to see the information that the credit union wanted them to assist with without seeing any other aspects of the preparations or the sensitive information contained in the system. Just before we go into the demo, we're going to show you how we set up roles and more importantly, do the work assignments, show you how we can track individual and team status, how people stay aware of changes across the team, when we're looking at the risk and the maturity states as they evolve, and really how we go and review and approve issue resolutions. If you will, give me just a moment while the system launches the application. Okay, for this first piece of it, I am going to log in as the administrator. The admin is the person who sets up the environment for the credit union, makes the assignments, establishes the roles. So when this person logs in, their landing page allows them to define certain basic information about the credit union, upload logos, set the timeline, importantly, for the examination, starting at the end of July, looking to end in mid-January. If an institution has worked with the CAT and has a CAT workbook that contains valuable information, the examiner can import that information from the CAT workbook into the ACID, personalize the disclaimer that users will see when they log in, broadening out. The security policy is tailorable to match the institution's desires. But the area I wanted to emphasize really is the establishment of users and the assignment of work to those users. So I've built a user community here of about 20 individuals, really focusing on titles rather than people. You'll notice that each one has a role assigned. Multiple people can have the same role. I think we have about 6 editors because the information requires specialists in a particular area. Multiple reviewers, internal auditors, outside reviewers assigned. Each of them, as I said, get this role, which indicates what they do in the workflow. And once the users are established, then we can actually assign work to them. We allow assignment down at a granular level within the workbook. Each of the smaller areas within the major sections. So within the risk profile, there are 5 different areas to assign work. In technologies and connection types, for example, the editor is assigned as IT support right now. But if we felt that was inappropriate, we could pick any other editor role, and that just made the change to where data center operations is now responsible for this area. You can see different areas, different people are responsible. Electronic services on delivery channels, VP of Information Technology for organizational characteristics, card services covering mobile products and technologies, risk management covering external threats. Like the editor can be different, all the roles can change. The reviewer can also be changed, the approver. If you have outside review, in this case we have a league audit department assisting, who's responsible for release and who the NCUA examiner is. All of that can be assigned, again, at the subsection level. This holds true for the domains and also for the document request list assignments. So by going through this process, a much larger team than usually could be engaged in this activity can be identified and assigned to those sections that are most relevant for their experience. And the tool provides the background to manage that once folks are assigned to these roles. Okay, from there, I'm now going to log in as an approver role. In our world, the approver is thought of as an executive who's tactically responsible for preparing, the exam's content and results. Within the Redstone world, it's our senior assistant VP for cybersecurity, and many of the other institutions we've talked to, it's their CISOs who are responsible. Also could be a vice president for IT or perhaps a vice president for internal audits, again, depending on the credit union. When this person logs in, they're presented with a personal landing page, which contains some components I want to go through. Every individual working on the system has their individual work progress gadget, which shows how they are doing in each of their assigned areas. For this individual, you can see they've completed 26 of the 39 risk profile items assigned, only 2 of the 500 approximately domain items, and 46 of the documentation of the 67 document request list items. As I said, each individual gets that. It's stoplighted to show how they're progressing. To be green, you need to be ahead of the today bar, which is where we estimate you should be if you're on track to finish on the date that you have projected. To the right of that is the progress overview for the overall project. It tracks how you're doing in terms of completing it against your timeline, showing the target date, here the January date, and then where it's actually forecasted to end at this point, which is out in June, which indicates that we do have an issue. Quick way to kind of figure out where that issue lies, we can look at each of the individual items and see that the documentation request list is not the problem. The risk profile does not appear to be the problem. We're already 65% through approval, but when we go to the domains, yeah, that's what's lagging, and that's what's driving our date out. So that's a way to know where you stand, to see what progress you've made recently, and to know if you've got a challenge to resolve in terms of completing on time. Each individual also gets a recent changes view of the world. This is how you track what's happened across the system. I can go and open this up, and it informs me, hey, item 30 was just changed to approved by me an hour ago. Item 39 was rejected. Or if I scroll down a little bit further, I can see that item 10 was moved to me to work and improver review. So I'm going to go ahead and flag that one for follow-up. The same concept applies for the domain material and the documentation list. The flagged items are those that I've tagged for me to follow up on. I think I need to have an action on them. So if I go in and, for instance, on 369, I want to see what's been done there. It's been moved to my review. I can open it up, see 369, and it's basically that we have an inventory that we use to create our data diagrams, and our answer is yes. There are 4 associated documents. I can go over here and through the guide understand how the NCUA will look at this. So they're going to review my IT asset inventory and hardware and software, look at my network data flow and connectivity diagrams. So right here, I know what they're going to look at as I'm answering the statement. I can go see what documentation I've associated with it. So I've got the asset inventory, the network topology, the data flow diagrams, the network diagrams for wireless. All of those have been linked to it. As a user of the system, I can then come in and see any comment information that's provided by the people working on the item, or by clicking on it, I can actually launch and view the document right inside the tool. That's a quick, I guess, other thing. We do keep a change history. This will probably be important at some time to audits, where you can go back and see when the changes were made to the item, what the changes were, who made them will be on here. You can see by user net management did these things. So we just keep a comprehensive audit trail as we go through the examination process. While on this page, I do want to point out that you were capable of filtering these items. So if you only wanted to look at the baseline maturity items, we would get down to really just 4 in connection types. For example, it's a way to focus your work to a particular level. The NCUA actually does recommend starting with baseline, and then after you're well through that, coming back to the other areas. So if I go back to the home landing page, you'll see a couple of dashboards here, the domain maturity level dashboard and the risk profile dashboard. These are both really items that came out of the NCUA's ACID workbook. They're here to help you track your evolving maturity and your risk profile. They're updated as statements are addressed and answered. They're incomplete until all of them are done, but in this case we've got enough to establish an initial risk level. On the domain maturity, nothing is complete far enough at this point to establish a maturity level. And if we were interested in details on that, there's a much more detailed graph that kind of shows you where your maturity is as it's evolving. And then this graph, we allow you to look at it from the perspective of all the items that are in edit as versus those that have been approved. A much more optimistic picture in edit, although still a lot of work to do to get through the full baseline, but significant work done on the evolving as well. So this just gives you a different perspective. You can understand what's coming versus what's been in approver review or what's been approved. As we said, very little has been approved at this point. Okay. The last thing I'd like to show then is a little bit of how an editor does his work, which well, I'll need to log out and log back in as an editor. Oh, okay, so as how a reviewer does their work. This person is assigned to review certain items. As you can see, they've got 14 risk profile items, 225 domain items, and 17 documentation items. The same, again, the same thing, they can see the recent changes. If they want to filter that, they can focus it down just to the ones that are relevant for them, that are pending their work. You can see then that a lot of the messages are hidden. And if they were to go through and do a review, under that they would only see 3 items because only 3 items are available for them to work. Whereas if they expand it to look at all my items, you can see a bunch of items that have been completed or haven't yet been edited. How they would go about a review, open up the item. They can look here and see what statements are linked to it. In this case, 190 and 284 are linked to this document item. Same process of reviewing the documents if they choose to, the comments that have been associated with the documents. Okay, at this point, I'd like to pause and open up for questions.
Thanks so much, Steve. We do have a couple of questions that have come in over the web portion today. Just a reminder for attendees, you can also type in your question to the Q&A panel. The question that we first have from an attendee is, how do we know the documents stored in the system are secure?
That's a great question. The answer is that we're using a product called Virtual Strongbox behind this portal to manage the documentation. Virtual Strongbox is a tool specifically developed for secure document management. It's used by hundreds of credit unions to provide an electronic safety deposit box to their members, so you know that it's got great security. We work with them on their platform services to build that behind our tool for archiving all of the sensitive documents.
Wonderful, thank you. The second question we have from the Q&A panel is, how do we know who is assigned to work any particular item?
Another good question, something that's been built into the tool. I hadn't demonstrated, but if you want to know who's working an item, you simply click there. You can see that the network manager was responsible for editing it. The vice president of information technology is the reviewer of it. The approver is the Chief Information Security Office. No outside review is assigned in this case. That step is skipped. The VP of Internal Audits is the person that holds them for release to the NCUA. And as of yet, no NCUA examiner has been assigned to this statement. So that information is there for really any statement within the system, and it can vary. It happens not to for this grouping of items. But a good question. We've allowed, and we've put at everyone's fingertip who owns the item as it processes through the workflow.
Great, thank you so much. And then we are going to go ahead and open audio lines for questions at this time. I am going to unmute your line as participants, so just to note that we are going to unmute your line. Please refrain from speaking if you don't have a question for this period of time so that we make sure we don't have a ton of background noise. I'm unmuting participants now.
Your microphone has been
turned on. And again, if you have
on.
any questions as a participant, please feel free to go ahead and jump in if you have a question at this time.
I have one question.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Is there an import for the FCAT that the banks are using that we've been working on for the last couple of years?
Yes, there is. If you recall back when I reviewed the admin screens, there was a potential for the administrator to import the CAT workbook and have those answers mapped to the appropriate ACID statements so that they could preserve their work that had been performed on the CAT as well migrating into the ACID environment. Thank you. Thank you for that question.
And I have one other question. When examiners access the portal to view the documents, can they put the same collaboration comments on those to ask questions or ask for, revisions?
Yes, they actually can. As they work through the workflow, you'll notice that we have 3 different comment blocks down here. Internal comments, those comments stay within the credit union. Nobody outside the credit union can view those. Outside comments, these are comments that are designed to engage an outside reviewer, like if you had brought in a lead audit practice or a consultant to help you. And then a third block, which is examiner comments. These are information exchanges between the credit union and the examination staff. So in the way you asked the question, an examiner reviewing an item, if they wanted to request more information, they could basically put a comment here explaining what they were looking for or what they saw as the need, and then send the, hit the request more information button on the examination for that item, and it would come back to the credit union for action.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Do we have any other questions on the audio line at this time?
Yeah, I got a
Last
question.
call for audio. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, is there on the login page, is there a way you can set up multi-factor authentication?
Actually, the development team is finishing multi-factor authentication this week. So it will be rolling into the product probably towards the end of next week. We've put it in there as an option for each individual. We anticipate it will be pretty close to mandatory for any of the outside entities. But yes, it's 1 week from delivery.
Awesome.
All right. Any other questions on the audio line? All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and mute participants again. Thank you for your questions, and Steve, please continue.
Sure. So that kind of ends the demonstration of the tool. Moving along, I wanted to give you a little bit of a view of where we're going with it. We've completed everything that's in the June release. We've completed a couple of items in the October release right now, the CAT import, the vertical preparation strategy, which allows you to focus on only those aspects of the domain that you, maturity that you're attempting to achieve in preparation for the upcoming exam. Also coming in October, a summary board report. The tool will give a progress report that's structured to provide information to present to the board or the audit committee. We'll be incorporating those charts that the FFIEC CAT has in it that the ACIT tool doesn't. There's some good visuals that help you to understand how your maturity is evolving. We'll be implementing data exports so that you can push a button, export the content back into the ACIT workbook format if that's how the NCUA wants to look at the information. Moving on in December, we'll be implementing a couple of things to keep people on track, intelligent notifications to let you know when there's actionable items, some nudging, which will come through email when the system sees that you're beginning to fall behind the timeline. It kind of reminds you to take a look and work particular areas of the exam preparation. We'll add a section to capture optional documents, those that are not on the DRL list that the credit union may wish to provide to the NCUA as further documentation. The ability to freeze the examination updates in case you're preparing for an exam and want to do a review and know that things won't be changing during that process. Then when we get into March, we'll implement basically the ability to archive the prior year, clone it to create the next year for exam preparation, do comparison views between the different years, and then significantly here, we'll be creating a customer premise version and tackling integration to the ON-based document management platform. At this time, I'd like to open up for the polling question.
And as a reminder for attendees, that polling question will appear on the right-hand side of your screen. All you need to do is click the radio button that corresponds with your answer, and then we will go ahead and gather your feedback.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll hold for a moment or two for folks to respond to the polling question. While doing that, I'd like to mention that we have 4 more webinars scheduled around the ACIT. We're focusing on different roles in the organization. The next one, Prevent Last-Minute Surprises, is kind of focused towards the internal audit teams and those that have to report to the board or the audit committee about progress. We're going through the question.
And the polling question is now open on the side of your screen. Just a reminder that after selecting your response on the radio button, you will also need to hit the submit button.
So as I was saying, we're running a series. The next one focuses towards those that have to do reporting, make sure that things get done on schedule. Friction-free cat herding, that's our special for the CISO types who are responsible for organizing this across everybody, the organization, making sure they get their information, get buy-in and participation from the people who only tangentially deal with cybersecurity. Save time and energy, really trying to focus towards how this may impact a CIO or a VP of IT who is responsible for preparing for the exam, but also keeping the systems and environment operating. And then finally, coming in December, we look forward to sharing some of the successes and lessons learned using this tool by a couple of other institutions.
Thanks so much, Steve. And the poll is now closed.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for responding to the poll. The next item up is if there are any other questions regarding the tool, the roadmap, perhaps what advantages folks might see from using it. Again, I think we'll open the audio line after we go through any questions submitted online.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. And we do have a couple of questions that have come in online. The first one that we have is, how long does it take to get the system up and running for a credit union?
Oh, Good question. So the system is built on a SaaS platform. It's a multi-tenant setup with completely separate databases for each institution. But the way the system's built, it takes us about 10 minutes to activate a copy of it for a new credit union, after which it takes an afternoon to really go through some training for the administrator, principally around how the roles and assignments work and the criticality of making sure you know who you want to have participate and what pieces of the work you want them to do. So after a little bit more than a day, calendar day of about probably 4 hours of focused effort, you can be off and running.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we only have one other question from the web portion at this time. What's the best approach for working on preparing for the exam inside of the tool?
Oh, okay. Well, we believe, after having gone through this and talked with Redstone, our parent credit union, the best approach to go about this is, first make the assignments at the admin level, do a plan for that, then come back and really focus on uploading, getting the document, the request list uploaded. The documents are really going to be the substantiating information folks use to address the statement. So getting those in place early then provides the foundation. After that, the next place to really focus is the risk profile, and then going back into the domains and targeting those targeting a particular domain maturity level and working that level until it's complete. Important to understand, if you've got a number of different people working in different areas, that work can go on simultaneously using the tool. So once the documents are in place, work can begin on the domains and the risk profile at the same time. I appreciate the question.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. And we do have one other question that's come in on the web portion before we open the audio lines for questions. This question is, can you seed your new portal with a prior ACET workbook?
I'm going to answer that question as yes, although it may take me a week to prove it. We've built the ability to import a CAT workbook. The CAT workbook and the ACET workbooks are pretty close to identical in regards to the risk profile and the domains. So if a client had an ACET workbook they wanted to import instead of a CAT workbook, we'd make sure that the software logic worked or adapted as appropriate to import that ACET workbook. So yes, with a little bit of tweaking.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute our participant lines now in case we have any questions over the audio line. Again, for our participants, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your line so that if you have a question, feel free to go ahead and ask it over the audio.
Your microphone has been turned on.
Participants, your lines are now open. Any questions from an audience member at this time? Pause for just a few more minutes, or just make sure we don't have any questions over the audio. All right, last call for any questions over the audio lines. Great. I'm going to go ahead and mute our participant lines again.
Questions?
And I think that's all of the questions that we have for today.
Okay. Lastly, just a brief summary of who we are. The Redstone Consulting Group is a QSO. We're wholly owned by Redstone Federal Credit Union. Redstone's one of about the 20 largest credit unions in the country. We were founded in 2012, received some capitalization from our parent in 2017. Our mission is to commercialize and disseminate technology developed within Redstone, also to work with other financial institutions to build solutions to industry problems. Our expertise is around cybersecurity and the DNA core for software. At this point, I want to thank everyone who participated and remind you that if you're interested in the tool, please reach out to Mr. Bray at jdbray@redstoneconsultinggroup.org or at 344-8600. Mention the Prepare to Succeed, and that will get you a 10% discount off the product. Okay, once again, thank you for your time. I hope to see you on one or more of the other webinars, and have a great weekend.
Thank you again to all of our attendees for joining us today. This does conclude today's conference.